Hello, my name is Christina Herron and Director of Free to Choose Medicine at the Heartland Institute. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Kris Held, ophthalmologist and surgeon in San Antonio, Texas, and the current president of the American Physician and Surgeons Association. Thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you so much, Christina, for having me.
I want to start off today asking you a little bit about COVID-19 and the access to unapproved therapies. What is the process for treating patients with the virus and the role of government in the process today? And what obstacles are you or other doctors facing so far?
Okay, so it's really unusual what's been going on with COVID-19. It's very different and counterintuitive to what's always gone on traditionally in medicine. Traditionally in medicine, the relationship has been between the patient and physician. And when a medical condition comes up, the physician goes through our armamentarium of all sorts of available therapies that we have, and we try to choose the best possible therapy for that patient in their individual circumstance. And with COVID-19, it's a new virus. So there's not a existing medication that treats COVID-19 that has an FDA approved indication. So we do what physicians always do, and we use our minds, our knowledge, our history, our experience, and we try to come up with the best possible treatment that what we have at hand to treat that patient. And of course, simultaneously, research goes on to create new and better treatments always. So particularly with COVID-19, people, physicians, scientists around the world have gone back to what works, what could we possibly use, understanding this virus. It looks to be a combination of the SARS, the MERS, and even aspects of HIV. So looking back into the studies, there was some evidence that the antimalarials, hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, these drugs have had a history of possibly having some benefit against the coronavirus. And even as far back as 05 and 06, there's an article in some evidence that even Dr. Fauci knew about that. And so people started looking at this as a possible medication. Now, the nice thing about, for example, hydroxychloroquine is that it is inexpensive. It's pennies, on the dollar. It's very inexpensive. And it has a very high safety profile, meaning there's 65 years of people taking it and not having very many side effects with it. We know a lot about the drug. It's commonly used. People take it around the world. Millions, if not billions of doses have been taken. So that was another thing, affordability and experience with it, a safety factor, and accessibility. We had it. But suddenly it became a hot button drug, and we started having difficulty prescribing it. For example, in Texas, our Governor Abbott passed an executive order, and our Texas Medical Board and our Texas Board of Pharmacy both entered in on and intruded on our ability to prescribe a 65-year-old drug to our patients. So we've had problems with a drug that has shown promise and is continuing to show promise. So this is a great place to start. I'd like to make a little comment about FDA, the Food and Drug Administration.
Sure.
Hydroxychloroquine used to be over the counter, and chloroquine. What the FDA has been around a long time, and they used to just look at safety. And so we've established that the safety was there. They added safety and efficacy. So there was a period of time in the 60s where about 3,000 drugs, a lot of drugs were looked at. They knew they were safe, but they couldn't prove the efficacy. So there was a series of drugs that were taken from over-the-counter status and put back to prescription status. And hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine are one of those drugs. In some countries, however, they remain over the counter. And I think there's an argument to be made that maybe we should go back to those being over the counter and more drugs being over the counter to give patients and physicians a choice. There's really two ways of looking at medicine. One is the Hippocratic way that we've looked at medicine, where a physician's duty is to their individual patient. And this is opposed to the way Plato looked at it. These are two Greek philosophers from way back in the time period. And Plato looks more as that a physician should do more, take resources and allocate the resources to people that are more beneficial to the state. And in fact, even withhold resources from people that might be a burden on the state. So it's two really different ways of looking at that. And even today, in this day and age, when we're having a push for socialized medicine and Medicare for all, as a physician, we have to ask ourselves, who do we serve, the patient or the state? And there's been some of the more preeminent players in healthcare since, for example, Obamacare era or the Affordable Care Act, such as Don Berwick and Ezekiel Emanuel, who was one of the main architects of the Affordable Care Act. And they believed that government needed to step in between the doctor and the patient, that as a physician, my oath to my patient is too strong, it's too expensive, and that the government needs to step in. So we're at a huge philosophical divide. We have government entities that want to step in. They never have. Whereas those of us that trained in Hippocratic medicine, we are trained to use what we've got at hand to diagnose early and treat early. And so this has been a huge, to me, this shows me two main things. One, we do not want government-led medicine. Number two, we need more flexibility as physicians to be able to access medications and use them within our legal authority. And whether that be dispensed from physician's office, I'm actually involved right now with another physician suing the state of Texas, the Texas Medical Board and Texas Board of Pharmacy, to be able to remove a ban on in-office dispense of medications at cost for physicians. 46 states and DC have the ability to do this. Ironically, Texas doesn't. I think they've also engaged in a lawsuit in Montana for the same thing. So if I had the ability in my office to buy and then dispense drugs to my patients when I see fit, this would not be a problem. If these drugs were over the counter, this would not be a problem. But right now, our freedom to practice medicine and our autonomy is being really, I would say, attacked or assaulted by our government. And this has shown this problem glaringly. So what we had happen was a couple of things that I worry about. We had some intellectual dishonesty occurring, and we had some scientific fraud occurring. So when we had initial evidence that the combination of hydroxychloroquine, which is very safe, combined with zinc and maybe even an antibiotic, azithromycin, very common, people may know it from a Z-Pak, that could help patients who came down with coronavirus and perhaps keep them out of the hospital, keep them out of the ICU, keep them off a ventilator. We were ecstatic. We thought, oh my gosh, here comes this pandemic, but we can stop it in its tracks. We can change the course of the world. So I began every Monday night for months, a group of physicians across the country, we would convene on 1 and 2 hour long calls, and we would exchange personal anecdotal data of how people were caring for their own patients. We would exchange information about papers and research and studies from around the world, from China, from every country that it was going to, from France. And we had very encouraging data. And we had a Dr. Zelenko. Many people have heard about Dr. Zelenko from New York, who had amazing positive results treating his patients with what he now calls the Zelenko protocol. And a preprint is now out on his study of that. So we thought this is going to be great. Surprisingly, suddenly, anyone who started popularizing or trying to say, boy, we need to treat with this, started becoming demonized, if not attacked. And so you have to wonder, why is that? you start to become aware of conflicts of interests in big pharma. You start to become aware of big egos in studies across the world. And suddenly you go from being the doctor that wants to take care of your patient to being a part of a big worldwide, almost if you want to say economic, financial bioterrorism. And so this has been very, very interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your perspective, and I appreciate your philosophical perspective on this as well. And as you mentioned, there is no cure for the virus, but there are several drugs that have been approved by FDA. And it sounds like it's not only the federal government and federal Drug and Food Administration that you're fighting, not just the agency and federal government, but also state and more local entities and governments that you're battling to treat patients. So can you talk a little bit more about the off-label use that doctors and you were trying to use to prescribe hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, and then also just the need for doctors and patients to make decisions regarding healthcare, and how else are you battling the state to do to treat patients?
Okay, so let me give you an example of off-label and on-label use. So when a drug is approved by the FDA, we talked about safety and efficacy. It used to just need to be safety. Now they want safety and efficacy. But they made very clear, and in fact, when I read the first paper, when they pulled hydroxychloroquine and those other drugs from over-the-counter status, they said, this in no way implies that you shouldn't prescribe it. The FTC and the FDA make it very clear over and over again, just because something does not have a particular on-label indication doesn't mean you shouldn't use it for that. They make that clear over and over again. And I'll give you an example with ophthalmology. When people have wet macular degeneration, we inject a medication in the eye. The drug most commonly injected is Avastin. Avastin does not have an indication to be injected in the eye for macular degeneration. Now, there's one called Lucentis that does. But guess what? Insurance companies want you to use the Avastin. Medicare and the government wants you to use the Avastin because it's cheaper. In fact, if it doesn't work and you want the Lucentis, you have to go through all of these prior approvals. You have to prove you used it and it failed. You have to get special approval, prior authorizations. So they have relative indications. So if they want to make money on it and they want to profit from it, and I'm talking about big insurance, pharma, the government, they'll say, you can't use the one that has the FDA indication. You have to use the other one that doesn't first. That happens every day. 20% of the time or more, physicians use drugs off label. I bet you most patients, if they look, you are taking a drug off label. That doesn't mean it doesn't work beautifully for that. That means the drug got approved, and now we have that drug in our medicine cabinet, and we can use our brain and our minds and our experience to use it. So similarly with hydroxychloroquine, I use it. I see patients, thousands. Being an ophthalmologist, hydroxychloroquine is used for patients who have lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. Many patients, you take one pill. The typical pill is 200 milligrams. Many patients take 2 pills twice a day for years without a problem. And I see these patients at least once a year. And I do that because there's a very low chance of having problems in your retina or in your macula. So we see these patients every year, and it's very exceptionally rare that there's a problem. If there was, then we would stop the hydroxychloroquine. So a dose, very typical, would be 1 pill twice a day. So I'm very familiar with it on that standpoint. And when I talk, so the people that prescribe it the most are the rheumatologists. And when I've talked to my rheumatology colleagues, I've said, do you even get a pre-treatment EKG, a test for your heart? And they say, no, that is not standard practice. So a lot of the hoopla and concern about hydroxychloroquine came with the heart and the EKG. At the doses that we prescribe and we see outpatient, there's not a problem. It's extremely rare. So I felt, wow, I couldn't find a cheaper, safer, more proven drug. This is a miracle. Now, how does it work? It's a zinc ionophore. You've got to take the hydroxychloroquine with zinc. Hydroxychloroquine allows the zinc to get in the cell so that the zinc can stop the replication of the RNA virus. So it just works great. It's outpatient. You can get zinc. Well, then the initial outcries were, oh my gosh, you can't use that. The lupus and rheumatoid arthritis patients won't have it. So what did we do as physicians? We said, okay, let's make more pies. You know, we're not limited to this amount of hydroxychloroquine. How do you make it? So we went to our colleagues. I have a colleague very near San Antonio, a friend who owns a company that can make pills. I said, how fast could you make these? He goes, if I get the active pharmaceutical ingredient, API, I can set up my pill presses. And if we got government to let us get quick production going on this, cut red tape, I can make 1 million pills in a 24-hour shift.
Wow. That's incredible.
At 6 cents a pill. Again, we're thinking the pandemic's not going to get us. We've got safe pills. Let's go. Just get some red tape cut. Well, the hoarding, physicians are hoarding. You know, if I'm a physician and I want to take care of my patient, I want to get the pills for them. That's not hoarding. That's being a good physician. Do you want to go to a doctor that doesn't have the pills, or you want to go to the doctor that has the pills?
Right.
Come on. It's not hoarding, and it was a fake lie. So then we said, let's make a lot. Well, we're getting into what you're talking about right now. So we've talked about outpatient use. We've talked about low dose. We've talked about preventing people getting into the hospital. So companies, big drug companies that make a lot of the hydroxychloroquine, donated to the federal government. We have a national stockpile, and hydroxychloroquine has actually been listed as one of the essential meds, like one of the top meds in the world. Have on hand in your stockpile. So I thought, and we thought, wonderful. Now we have donations of hydroxychloroquine to be used in New York. And New York was a mess. They were the epicenter of the epicenter. They were hit hard. And we thought, great, they can treat their patients. New York also had Dr. Zelenko right there in a small community outside of New York City that had treated hundreds of patients, of his own patients, with the triple therapy, the hydroxychloroquine, the zinc, and then the azithromycin, with fabulous results. So as physicians, we treat people based on case reports. Like if something comes up, we don't know what it is, and someone says, well, I treated it like this way it worked, we will learn from case reports of small numbers of patients. And then we'll look back at retrospective studies, meaning we'll go back and look at all the patients that had, whatever it was, and who did better with what. And then they always say the gold standard now is to look at a prospective study. So now you set up a study where you give some people the med and you don't give others, and then you look at the results. But it takes time to get a prospective study. Based on positive case reports, we start, and then we can always look back at our retrospective studies and say what works and what didn't. But you have a starting point, and you have to have the ability to see the patient. You don't just sit by and go, you're dying for 2 years till we get a drug made. That's not how it works. You've got to take care of that patient right then, and there are things that'll work. So we thought, fantastic. The national stockpile has hydroxychloroquine, and who got it? New York. They gave it to New York. But what did they do? They put strings on it, and they put strings on it that set it up to fail. And there's a group, one of the agencies, we were talking about all the agencies within the CDC and the NIH, and the HHS is the big government agency, Department of Health and Human Services. So there's a part of that called BARDA, and there was a Dr. Rick Bright, who's not a doctor, he's a PhD, and he didn't particularly want hydroxychloroquine to be successful, and he also has gone on record as being political. And there's one thing that medicine should not be, and that's political. It should not be, there shouldn't be conflicts of interest with regard to money, and it shouldn't be political. But suddenly it was. And it is. It's sad to say that when you start dealing with the CDC and the FDA, it's political. And I used to think it wasn't, and I used to be Pollyanna, and it is. And this is a prime example of that. So when he said, okay, New York can have the hydroxychloroquine, he didn't say that all the family practice doctors and the urgent care doctors and everyone could use it outpatient. He said it can only go to hospitalized inpatients who have tested positive. Now, at this point in time, there weren't very many tests around. So in order to get a test, you had to be very sick and very symptomatic. Right. The test took maybe 5 days to come back. And if you're in the hospital, you're in the hospital because your lungs are already trashed. What happens with the COVID-19 is, among many of the things that it can do, is it causes what's called a cytokine storm in your lungs, tremendous inflammation and blood clots, and suddenly your lungs won't breathe. And that's why you have to go to the hospital. Well, we want to keep people out of the hospital. We wanted the hydroxychloroquine to be used outpatient at those low safe doses that we've known about 60 years. They said no, can only be used inpatient. When the horse is out of the barn, you're in cytokine storm, you're about to go on a ventilator because we don't have anything else. And only then if a study's not available. So it sat there. Talk about hoarding. It sat there unused. Now they still have the donated hydroxychloroquine, and they're either going to give it back to the drug companies, or I think we need to try to get it in Texas and be able to use it outpatient.
Right.
So now let's go into the conflict of interests. And the scientific fraud and the intellectual dishonesty. There's a drug called remdesivir that showed promise with treating coronavirus. And ironically, if you go back and look at some of the patents of some of the drugs and the RNA and the viral patterns, you'll find them linked back to Dr. Fauci, which is interesting, but maybe not surprising since he's been there for 25 years. I also think people need to know that if you're at the NIH or at the National Institute of Allergy and Immunologic Diseases, like he is and has been for 25 years, you also can profit from patents that you have personally. So, and I'm not saying him, I'm not blaming it on him. But I'm just saying that there are companies like Gilead that make remdesivir that we've heard thought they would not only have $100 billion drugs, but they thought they might have their first $1 trillion drug. And they're also one of the companies that works on the vaccines. So there might be a perverse financial incentive or conflict of interest for them. What they want people to go. I'm not saying they want people to go in the hospital, but I'm saying they want their drug to work. And it's meant to be inpatient. It's IV. It's very expensive. And if hydroxychloroquine works, you don't need their drug. That sounds really cynical, but we have to realize that. So the studies that were set up said now you can use the hydroxychloroquine inpatient when the patients are very sick. And if you look at some of the studies around the world, the doses, there's one that in Brazil, there's a study in Brazil that they're actually investigating the study designers for almost like crimes against humanity. I said 1 pill twice a day is what people typically take. That's 200 milligrams twice a day. That's 400 milligrams total. Well, their patients were getting 2,400 milligrams within the first 24. So, if you took 6 to 12 times of any drug, your kidneys, liver, you're not going to do so well, your heart. The other thing is hydroxychloroquine has a long half-life. That means when you take a pill, it stays in your blood a long time. In fact, 3 weeks. So if you take a pill and it's still going to stay in your blood for 3 weeks, you don't keep taking it or you're going to end up, over the top. So what they did is not only gave people huge doses initially, they kept giving it to them, giving it to them, giving it to them. So it built up in people's tissues. So there's evidence that coronavirus can affect your heart. Then you put toxic doses of drug on your heart and it can affect the rhythm of your heart. You're going to have some problems. So the doses, they set up patients on toxic and lethal doses to be giving when they're already very sick. And I think that's called setting it up for failure. And guess what else they didn't do? They didn't give it with zinc. The whole mechanism of action is for the hydroxychloroquine to get the zinc in the cells. Well, if you don't have zinc around, what are you getting in the cells? Hopefully people have zinc in their body if they eat meat, if they eat foods that contain zinc, if they take vitamins that have zinc. But they didn't put zinc in the study. So they were very poorly designed studies that were available and they were treating it on the wrong patients. So as a result, they stopped the studies. Now I'll tell you, there's 2 things that happened. 2 of the most famous journals in the world, medical journals, the most highly revered are the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine. Both of those rushed to press articles about hydroxychloroquine, and they had there was a company called Surgisphere that said they were this huge worldwide data collecting company, and they rushed these articles to publication. Both had to be retracted. The data could not be proven. So now we had falsified data making hydroxychloroquine look terrible. And then guess what domino fell next? The World Health Organization, which had studies, one called the Recovery Study and another one, the Odyssey, had these studies going around the world that would show that hydroxychloroquine helped. We're trying to change a pandemic. They pulled those studies based on fraudulent studies, but you never hear that. So now we have fraud perpetrating a fraudulent mistake, and all the while we're not able to use what's been set up to fail. Now, and in the meantime, the remdesivir was being tested in the hospitals, and they did something unusual. When they started the study, they said, we're going to look for an improvement, which would be a decrease in death. Well, they didn't see that. So what they did is they changed the endpoint that they were looking for to a decrease in hospitalization days. So the drug got approved by an emergency use authorization by decreasing the average hospital stay from 15 to 11 days. So a 30% reduction. They didn't spend a lot of time talking about there was also a high incidence of complications, including multi-organ failure. And they didn't talk about the cost. And so it was very interesting how rapidly that got pushed through. And it's interesting because when I've read studies from around the world, I was kind of like, why is our average hospital day in the United States 15 days? A lot of places, the average hospital's day was, 5 to 10 to 11 days. So here we have a longer hospitalization stay. We're lowering it, and that's how remdesivir got approved. And it runs more like about $3,000 a patient instead of $50. Also, you have to be in the hospital and give it IV. So the expense is tremendous. So that was interesting how remdesivir got pushed through. And of course, now it's being donated and paid for by the government, and people are in the hospital and they're running out. While hydroxychloroquine sits hoarded by New York, expiring. And what's happened in the meantime are things that are good. Around the world, scientists went ahead and set up studies and did this. And if you look at some of the countries that are doing very, very well, they're treating outpatients, they're treating their frontline health workers, they're treating their at-risk patients with low-dose hydroxychloroquine prophylactically, and they're doing well. And we're learning from those studies. The Dr. Zelenko protocol came out and showed that, and he did a retrospective study where he compared his patient population that all were COVID test positive or antibody positive. And he compared them to a group of controls, which is a very common way that studies are done. And he was able to show that if you use hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and either azithromycin or doxycycline, not in everybody, but in at-risk groups. And one of those groups is anyone over 60 that becomes symptomatic. Or if you become symptomatic and then you have the other risk factors like diabetes, lung problems, hypertension, pregnancy, and you get on that, he was able to decrease hospitalizations by 84%.
Wow.
And the survival rate once they got in the hospital, because if you don't go into the cytokine storm, your lungs aren't trashed, you don't have to go on a ventilator and you live, 99.3% survival rate. My gosh, why are we not using this? So it's because, and we need to be, and we still have time to do it, and I'm hoping we will. There's another Dr. Raoult from France, and he had wonderful, promising studies. And he also, you know, these doctors are attacked. They try to denigrate them and undermine them, even though they've been credible doctors, researchers, the French doctor, and Dr. Zelenko and his community. And there's many other doctors who are using it and doing well. But the studies are now coming out that are saying, look, it worked. And you talk about we need to be using it. And more doctors do. But now there's a stigma involved, and they publicize that it didn't work and that it killed people. Patients are afraid to take it. And then they don't publicize that, whoops, there were some fraudulent studies that got retracted by the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine. So we don't have the full truth getting out there. And I think that's a shame. There's another promising treatment called convalescent plasma. And convalescent plasma is useful. And I think we need to look at that, not just in the ICU. If people donate blood, if they've had the COVID infection and then they are able to donate, they're able to actually give the antibodies to the patients. And that's really helpful. Here in Texas, we have there's a lab called New Plasma or Golden Genesis, and it's near a college. And they can collect the plasma and spin it down. And wouldn't that be cool if you could just inject like a single dose, not hang a whole bag when you're sick, but inject prophylactic dose of the plasma, give people antibodies, you know, frontline workers, nursing home patients, early symptom on, and keep them from going on a ventilator. So there's things that we could be doing. Interestingly, and sometime you should look at this, a lot of our nation's plasma is being sold to China. So that's something y'all should also look at. But if you look at the fact that right now, for example, in Texas, our case numbers are going up, and that's a whole nother topic that we should talk about as well sometime. But right now, we're short on beds. We're short on the hospital. What better thing to do than put people on an oral pill that's cheap, that has an 84% decreased hospitalization rate? Right. We'd have 4% less people going into the hospital with COVID. So it really is nonsensical to me why we don't do that. Now, I'm going to make one other comment that's interesting. When you do a prospective study, so you go to your university and you want to do a randomized prospective study, a drug company will come to you and say, hi, we want you to do a test. Would you like to test remdesivir? And the university says, sure. And they say, okay, we'll pay you $4 million. Some universities got more, and you can look at how much money some places got. Columbia, you know, you can go look it up. If there's a drug that's cheap, you know, that's over the counter that anybody can make, like hydroxychloroquine, and you do that study, there's nobody willing to pay you $4 million. So I think that people are more likely to do the remdesivir study than set up and design the hydroxychloroquine study. And maybe that's a place that government and states could have a role in medicine, helping fund, which is the way FDA and all this stuff started out, NIH. The idea was we could help do research. But what happened is it got co-opted by a lot of people with conflict of interest, like the Dr. Bright we talked about earlier, who's no longer there, but who set up those gotcha strings to use of the hydroxychloroquine that set it up to fail and kept it from being used on outpatients. So we've got to be very, very careful when we need a restructuring of the FDA and the CDC and the NIH. We probably need some new blood. You know, Fauci has been there for 85 years, and one of the things he's supposed to do is he's supposed to be in charge of pandemic preparedness. Did you know that in 2017 he had a $4.5 billion budget? 2018 it went up, 2019 went up, and did you know that this year in 2020 he has a $5.5 billion budget in his little division of the NIH only? I would think that if I had $20 billion over the last 4 years, I could have been prepared for this, particularly if I held patents on it. The other comment I'm going to make is people that are hunkering down and waiting for the vaccine. It's good you didn't hunker down and still waiting for the vaccine for AIDS and HIV that Fauci's been working on since 1984 and 85, because it's not there. It is very difficult to make a vaccine to a highly fluid virus like an RNA virus, like a coronavirus that mutates all the time. It's people that are waiting at home with a mask under their bed are going to be sorely disappointed. So we need to work on treatments. We need to do things that we have right now. And one of the things we have right now is hydroxychloroquine with zinc, and then either doxycycline or azithromycin. And be careful if you have a long QT interval. There's also ivermectin. Ivermectin is a drug that people may have used being used on their horses or their dogs, or it's used in humans for parasites. Ivermectin is showing promise, and that's something that's low cost and something we have. So there are things we can make, things we can use. We need to be, we're ingenious as Americans. We need to have the freedom to be ingenious and to engage with our patients, and patients should have the freedom to choose. If you go to your doctor and you're like, you know what, I really want to try the Zelenko protocol. A patient should have that right too. And a doctor and a patient should have the relationship that they can individually make that decision. We don't need government coming in and saying, nope, you cannot use it. And I was shocked in Texas. This is bringing me back full circle to my work to try to get rid of the ban of physician dispense in Texas. I thought when they're eliminating, we're trying to fast track everything, get rid of restrictions. I thought Governor Abbott is going to come out and say, go for it, doctors. We need you. It's a pandemic. Treat your patients, dispense from the office. They do not need to be waiting in line. If you're hunkered down, why do you need to then go to the pharmacy and go every other way? Shouldn't you be able to just go to your doctor, get your meds? They did the opposite. They said, nope, y'all might hoard it. You cannot prescribe hydroxychloroquine without a diagnosis written on there that says they have COVID, proven by a test. And if you do, you're going to get investigated. And you can only write for 14 days worth of the pill, as if you're writing it for lupus. So people would get 28 pills. They put a lot of strings on it. And the pharmacists started reporting people. Doctors, I have friends and colleagues, wonderful physicians right now being investigated aggressively by the Texas Board of Pharmacy and the Texas Medical Board, some of the finest doctors I know, because they wrote those prescriptions for their patients. So being a doctor and just trying to write a prescription for my patient, and guess what that came with? Because it was violating an executive order, 180 days in jail, $1,000 fine, perhaps loss of my licensure, restriction of my licensure, no due process, obligated snitching.
Wow.
Snitching. One of the doctors was reported by a pharmacy tech at a Walgreens in a small rural town outside of San Antonio. Unreal. What in the world? And this is Texas. Interesting times.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for breaking that down and kind of breaking down how the national stockpile works and how the hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine with zinc combination, has been distributed or lack thereof. And looking at the future, what are your thoughts on future treatments for COVID? I know you mentioned a few, and looking to obviously treat people beforehand because the vaccine will take so long to develop. But what are ways that the FDA and state and local governments can help doctors navigate COVID-19? Or do you have any suggestions to help doctors and patients where FDA and government won't be hindering them?
I do. I think that they have got to. There are still states where they won't let you write for it. So there are doctors and patients trying to get connected and get a hold of the hydroxychloroquine, and depending on the state, they cannot. So telemedicine, I think, by allowing people to order their medications online, be able to get medications across state lines, being able to use telemedicine. I think that the governors that have one, I think we might have to challenge the constitutionality of governors, and every state has a different constitution, but coming in and suddenly interfering in the doctor-patient relationship. And, I got my medical license in Texas, and I should be able to prescribe. I don't know when my governor started, being able to tell me what I could prescribe and wasn't. So I think we have to address it on the state level with our autonomy and our ability to write. I think that people need dispense. We need physician dispense. We need physician autonomy, restoration of the patient-physician relationship. I think we need restructuring at the FDA, CDC, NIH levels. I think we need perhaps money to go into research so that physicians who have ideas that aren't working for or affiliated with a large pharmaceutical company can do studies that look really good. So I'm optimistic about possibly being able to use the convalescent plasma. I think that would be an interesting, and looking at really new, innovative ways of working with antibodies and nanotechnologies, things like that. Taking, perhaps what if we came up with a molecule where we're able to combine the hydroxychloroquine and the zinc. I think there's a lot of research that can be done with what we've got. Certainly, I think that there are antivirals and these things that'll come up, and that's got to go on. But right now, we've got to use what we have, and that's possibly the ivermectin, the zinc. Oh, I think every day people should be taking vitamin D, zinc, and, even in China, as you recall, they were using high-dose IV vitamin C, which had some effect. So I think we need to look beyond where we are. There's some really neat software and some ways that they're going and looking at all of the drugs that exist and being able to test it and say what might work. So I think using all the ways that we can do data analysis and molecule analysis, I think we can take all of what we've got every day, apply it to what we've had, and come up with some new innovative ideas. But I do not believe that staying home, okay, so let's talk about immunity. Younger people are getting it now, and that's good. Younger people are strong, and the immune system, there's T-cell immunity, and then you get your antibodies, IgM when you're acutely affected, and then IgG, which is your long-term. And the more people that develop T-cell immunity and antibodies, then the virus dies out. And also with time, the viruses tend to maybe mutate, hopefully get weaker. But as we all develop immunity, then the virus will go away. We're not walking around still hunkered down from SARS. We're not still walking around still hunkered down from MERS. People, and, you can't hunker down and just wait for a vaccine, that you might have to get a new vaccine every year, like a flu vaccine. So I think we need to open up our communities, be social distanced. If you are older, if you're over 60, be very careful. And if you have any comorbidities, and I think we need to look at putting high-risk people on prophylactic doses of hydroxychloroquine, possibly convalescent plasma. And the other thing I need to finally comment on the Zelenko protocol is it has got to be started within 5 days of your symptom. If you are 61 and you get a cough and a sore throat and a fever, go get tested, but don't wait. Go ahead and start that protocol because it's safe. And if you do that, then it has a high likelihood of keeping you out of the hospital. And there's some new studies coming out with that Dr. Held are putting on. I need to read some more today. We read these studies every day, and we'll find something. I'm encouraged. We just need to get government out of it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and thoughts on this, and for being a voice for patient freedom, and for supporting, the freedom to choose medicine. And do you have any final thoughts for our viewers on this issue?
Well, thank you so much for having me on and for addressing this issue. It's really important. Yes, if you're a patient, you have got to be your own best advocate. And I think that you need to read, and you can't just read the New York Times or, BuzzFeed, or I don't know, whatever it is. You have to read some scientific literature, and that's available online. That's really cool. There's PubMed. Read literature from around the world. Read and educate yourself. It's pretty straightforward if you read the abstracts. And talk to your doctor. Have a relationship with your doctor. It is a relationship. And if your doctor won't prescribe to you or won't have a relationship with you, then you need to get a new doctor. And what's been going on with medicine right now with the employed physicians, and your doctor changes every day because you get who your insurance company assigns you on your panel. Pick a different doctor. Get a direct patient care doctor that knows you. I think the other issue is if employed doctors, we talked about why aren't doctors just out? Why aren't we leading the way? Why aren't we as doctors out there saying, let's take whatever it is? Because about 50% of us right now are employed, and a lot of us fear retaliation. I'm not, and so I'm able to speak out because I've gone completely third-party free, including Medicare. They can't kick me off an insurance panel, I'm off. They can't, kick me off. I'm not, they can't fire me because I'm not paid by them. The employed physicians fear being fired. They fear being kicked off the panel. And so they're going to do what they are told to do by protocols. And as we alluded to earlier, are you serving your patient or are you serving your employer, which is maybe the government, the hospital, and insurance panel? You need to find a doctor that serves you. You need to be your own best advocate, and you need to fight for the ability to be able to continue to choose to do that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I agree 100%. And that was a phenomenal discussion, and I really appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much. Keep doing all your great work. Gosh, we sure need ability to get the word out like this. Thank you, Christina.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and consider donating to the Heartland Institute to support more vibrant free markets, greater individual liberties, and more videos like this one.